In this tutorial, we're going to talk about impact damage. Impact damage is when we take a rigid body or another object and throw it at one of our destructibles. This will actually cause the destructible to break and cause a damage impact event. So we're going to show you how to set up a wooden asset to take a boulder and break in UDK. So here we are in UDK. We have our wooden fence that we've created. It has a few default parameters set on it that we're going to go ahead and show you real quick. We have a damage threshold set to a value of 25. We have a damage spread. And also one thing important to note is we have default impact damage depth. So what this does is you set that to the maximum depth you want impact damage to happen at. The next thing we're doing is we're also throwing a rigid body at this asset. We're doing this in Kismet, so feel free to go ahead and take a look at how this is set up. But most importantly, we have notify rigid body collision checked on the actor spawning class. This will actually let that wooden plank take damage from a rigid body. So let's go ahead and jump in Pi, and I will show you real quick what happens with the default settings. The one thing I'm going to set before we do that is you do have to add an impact damage. Impact damage essentially states is how much force the wooden object is hit with will get translated into damage on that asset. Okay, so let's look what this does. I'll hit my trigger and we'll throw our boulder. The first thing you're going to notice is we've got a pretty good damage setup here. This very large boulder actually breaks it. But the problem was that the boulder rebounded off of the object. How we change that is a parameter called impact resistance. What impact resistance does is it's actually how much that wooden object will push back on the boulder. When it is defaulted at 0, that means that no matter what, this asset will push back as much force as it has against that boulder. So this boulder will never be able to pass through the wooden object. So let's go ahead and try and see what this looks like with a default parameter of 200. You can actually see here that the boulder flew straight through the wood, almost all the way through. That's because 200 is a pretty small value. It doesn't actually push back on the boulder that much. So let's go ahead and set this to 50,000 and see what that looks like. Now as we shoot the boulder, you will actually see that it doesn't actually even pass through the first one. It bounces back fairly similar to how it looked like when it was at 0. So we need to find the good balance here. The value we're going to go ahead and select for this particular demonstration is going to be 750, because I think that gives it the most wood-like experience. Now as you can see, this breaks through the first two no problem and just kind of rolls through there and then slows down a bit. This is probably going to be your most realistic behavior, and you can go ahead and tune this to your heart's content. Now let's go ahead and talk about the last parameter that's really related to impact damage, and that's going to be called impact velocity threshold. What that actually is set to do is when your rock is below a velocity threshold, it will actually not do any impact damage. There's a couple of various use cases for this, but basically let's say you have a really heavy object and it hits something at a couple of meters per second and you don't necessarily want to damage your object from that. You can actually set this impact velocity threshold and remove that force from being applied. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to 1500, and I'm going to show you what this is going to look like if we did something like this. So as you can see, even though we have everything set up as we did before, the boulder is actually slowing down enough that it's not actually going all the way through the wooden planks.